buffalo to the high plains of sturdy short grass.
All right, first off, I just want to tell you a little bit, I want to share with you a little bit about the Flint Hills. The Flint Hills is about 4.5 million acres. 4.5 million acres of native tallgrass prairie. The last remaining sizable tract of tallgrass prairie in North America. And it used to be, hundreds of millions acres. But we're down to what we have right here, and there's a reason for that. Now, the Flint Hills, very productive. 4.5 million acres of native grassland produces every year about $650 million worth of beef. Now, I know if you go to Washington, D.C., that's not a hell of a lot. But in the Flint Hills, it is. So it's a large contributor to the ag economy in Kansas. Cattle grazing area, of course. We are the most productive grasslands in North America in the months of May, June, and July. Now, that's just the way it works because of the climate and the species of grasses that we graze. After that, the quality of our grass goes down quite a little bit. And so because of that, May, June, July has kind of shaped, to a large extent, how we graze the Flint Hills. All right. Now, I'm not a geologist, but I had a couple of really good friends that were geologists from Emporia State University, and they tried to teach me a little bit about geology. Are there any geologists in here? Oh my God, I could screw this up too. Well, if I'm wrong, correct me later, okay? Between 100 and 200 million years ago, this area was a sea, a shallow sea, a calm sea, created through sedimentation, pretty much a flat bottomed area. The seas came and went over a couple 100 million years, okay? Right here in the Flint Hills, those seas were what they called calcium-rich waters. They had a lot of calcium in the water, and then they supported plant and animal life. And as the plant and animal life died, why, the calcium out of those critters helped settle out. And so consequently, we become a limestone-based geology, okay? When you drive up and down 177 highway and go through the road cuts, you can see the layers of limestone, okay? That's calcium carbonate that settled out of those calcium-rich waters that were aided by the demise of plant and animals in the oceans over the year. The seas came and went. Now you'll also notice layers of chert, flint rock. You know, that's where we get our name, Flint Hills, and we call it flint rock. Geologically, it's called chert. That material was formed by volcanic eruptions during the time period when we were covered with oceans. And all the matter in the atmosphere settled out of the volcanic eruptions and settled down and made the layers of chert that are between the layers of limestone in the road cuts that you see. Now, You know, we're talking about a couple 100 million years. This just didn't happen overnight. But through that time period, we had a lot of years of water and a lot of years of volcanic eruptions, okay? A changing climate. Changing climate today has been going on, who knows, forever, okay? Covered with oceans. Here's some of the local natives waiting for the oceans to recede. Okay, this is just a picture that illustrates the limestone and the chert, the flint stone mixed in there that makes up the parent material of our soils. Over time, our soils weathered, millions of years worth of time. Plants evolved. We had prairie plants. We had fungus and bacteria that all aided in that weathering. And the Flint Hills, through that weathering process, had a climate, rainfall, and it had erosion. And that's why the hills are hills and not the flat bottom of the ocean. It eroded away. Now, erosion, a natural process, okay? And you can see that when you're out in the pastures and you see rock outcroppings, okay? Everything below that outcropping eroded off and formed its own drainages. Eventually, we had grazing animals come along, and they were primarily buffalo, elk, deer, and possibly some antelope, okay? They grazed the what's now the Flint Hills. You know, there's a lot of argument as to how long the buffalo been here, but they've been here thousands of years. The Native Americans, the American Indian, there's evidence of their presence in the Flint Hills 12,000 years ago, okay? They lived off the buffalo. Now, 12,000 years, think about that, folks. Have any of you ever read the Bible? I'll be darned, okay. All right, a lot of what we read about in the time of Jesus was about 2,000 years ago. That's so far back that most of us can't even fathom that time period. It's just so foreign to us, okay? We're talking about a Native American presence of 10 or 12,000 years ago, 5 or 6 times before the years of Jesus. They got along here, of course, you know, they thrived off of here. Some of them were farmers. Most of them were hunters and gatherers. And then along come the European presence, okay? Before I get into that, before the time of the American Indian, we're pretty sure that we had a lot of fire in the tall grass prairie because it stayed a prairie. It didn't become a woodland over a period of time, which is the natural progression of plant life. Okay? When the Indians come along, good indication that they burned the prairie to attract the buffalo. They burned the prairie to protect their villages, keep wildfires from wiping out their villages. They possibly used fire as a tool of warfare. Okay? So all indications are that when the Europeans arrived, all the early writings and recollections are that the Flint Hills was a sea of grass. And so the assumption is that we had a lot of fire during that time period. My opinion is the Indians were a big part of that. I think they probably did a lot of burning for the reasons I'm talking about. The reason I say that is that in my lifetime, I have seen lightning cause fires, but not very many of them. And so I don't think that lightning was a major fire of that time period. 1840s, Europeans come along, the settlers settled here in the Flint Hills through the 1850s and 60s. They pretty much displaced the Indian. For whatever you think about it, it happened, okay? Kansas-Nebraska Act started that process happening. The Preemption Act, which encouraged settlers to come out here and claim land, kept that idea going. The Homestead Act, you all know about the Homestead Act, 1861, is that right, Jeff? Yep, okay. Homesteaders could come out here and they could homestead, prove up on 160 acres, okay, as long as they lived on it and farmed 20 acres of it, okay? The Homestead Act worked really good until it got to the Flint Hills, okay? We did not have the type of environment that was conducive to growing crops. So, consequently, a lot of our homesteaders went broke and moved on. The only homesteads, well, I can't say the only ones, but most of the homesteads left in the Flint Hills that were original homesteads were those that were made in the creek bottoms and the river bottoms where we did have farm ground, okay? Now, there's a reason why it didn't work out. The terrain of the soil, terrain of the land, the rocks, okay, kept the Homestead Act from working through growing crops. So consequently, the Flint Hills, for the most part, remained a tall grass prairie native grazing area, okay? It's still here today because of that, and because of burning, and because of grazing. The homesteaders, what I've read about them and what I've tried to learn, homesteaders that came to Kansas, they weren't cattlemen. They were farmers. They came here to grow crops. They had hogs. They had chickens. They had turkeys. Only place they fit into the Flint Hills was the creek bottoms and the river bottoms. The rest of it was considered a wasteland, an actual wasteland. We never came to appreciate the grasslands until we became grazers, partly because of the cattle drives coming out of Texas. They got to, that only lasted about 15 or 20 years. But during that time, they brought cattle up, and sometimes they needed a place to graze them before they went on to Abilene or Ellsworth or wherever and ship them out. And so they started utilizing the Flint Hills. And so we really come to appreciate the Flint Hills as a grazing area, okay? Prior to that, it's kind of a waste area. Another act that had a big impact on us was the Railroad Act. The government wanted to get the railroads going through here. They didn't have enough money to build them. And so they told the railroad if they'd build a railroad through an area, they could have every other section of land, 8 miles each side of the railroad. So that left every other section for settlement, and the railroad could sell the land that was granted to them through the Railroad Act to finance the building of the railroad, okay? Again, it worked really well until we got the Flint Hills. We didn't have any settlers out in the grasslands to buy that land. Consequently, shrewd investors scooped up a lot of that railroad land and formed some of the larger ranches in the Flint Hills for not very many dollars, because again, there wasn't a use for the land. No, none of you guys would know Carl Hansen. All right, Carl was, he died at 102 years of age about 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But Carl related the story of a blacksmith in Strong City, an investor that had bought some of the railroad lands from the railroad through the Railroad Act, came on the train to Strong City, and he wanted to go look at his land. And his land was in the Matfield Green area. And so he asked the blacksmith if anybody would take him out there. Blacksmith said, "Sure, I'll take you." So they come out here in a buggy. When they got there, he found out that his land was hills and rocks and grass. And he thought he was buying farm ground. He had very disappointed. Went back to Strong City, and he asked the blacksmith, "What do I owe you for the buggy ride?" And the blacksmith thought, "I'll just take advantage of this East Coast investor." So I told him $5. The investor says, "My God, you got to be kidding. I tell you what, I'll give you that section of grass instead of the $5. And the blacksmith said, "I'd rather have the money." Carl relates that story that he heard it firsthand from the blacksmith. So wasn't a lot of value on it at that time. Transportation, the old railroads, shipping cattle in and out of the Flint Hills grew up as part of the Railroad Act worked, and the railroads came out here, shipped hundreds of thousands of cattle in and out of the Flint Hills. The transportation pretty much dictated the way we grazed the country, because we were limited as to how we could move our cattle around. Eventually, highways got better, trucks came along. You remember old Dwight Eisenhower? You know, he had that Interstate Highway Act. Man, we built a lot of highways since then. We've made trucks that can really go up and down them, and so that has all changed the way that the Flint Hills has been managed. Okay. We're pretty sure that lightning and Indians did a lot of burning in the Flint Hills. Those of you that are ranchers in the Flint Hills know the significance and the impact that ranchers have had on burning the Flint Hills. And they're the main source of fire today. And they, because of that, Flint Hills ranchers have become a major part of the evolution of the Flint Hills. If they wouldn't have been here to do the burning, the Flint Hills would change the way it looks today. We get enough rainfall to where it only takes 30 or 40 years of an absence of fire to where the tall grass prairie quits being a prairie and starts becoming a mixed woodlands. Now, big deal with the ranchers is that we got to do it safely. So burning, big part of the Flint Hills today because of the ranchers. But several years ago, I took a group of high school students and we did a range plant inventory of that area, which meant we inventoried what species of plants were out there. We went to the next pasture to the west and did the same thing, and it was a pasture that's been burned and grazed annually for forever. All right, the Chase County Lake pasture is approaching the complete loss of its diversity. 96% of the plants out there are warm season grass plants, the major plants in the Flint Hills. Indian grass, switchgrass, little blue stem, big blue stem, side oats, grama, okay? The pasture that's been grazed all the years, same inventory done by the same batch of kids, 2 weeks apart. It was about 75% of the plants out there were the major warm season grasses, and the other 25% made up a very diverse mix of other plants, including grasses and forbs, okay? In that pasture, those kids identified over 400 species of plants. In the lake pasture, it was pretty much confined to 5 or 6 warm season grasses. That's what happens when you take out, what did I do there? There you go. You got to have a grazing animal, and you got to have a fire, okay? Now, I've got to add to that. There's one other thing we have to do to, I'm about half dangerous. To maintain the prairie, and it's getting worse and worse, we got to control invasive plants, okay? They were plants that were brought in here. They're non-native, and they are super competitive against our native plants and stand the risk of taking over as major plants in the grasslands. Sericea lespedeza, musk thistle, old world blue stem, to a certain degree Johnson grass, bindweed. But those things ranchers got to control. Everything else, as far as controlling the undesirable plants in a prairie situation, most of it can be handled with fire, the use of fire. But the invasives, we got to do something different. So, That brings us down to why do we burn? That's pretty simple to me. It's a natural part of the evolution of the prairie, and it's necessary for its existence. Ladies and gentlemen, in the Flint Hills, in the tall grass prairie, burning is not optional. It is a necessity. Nothing will replace it. Now this is where I get on my soapbox, okay? And you guys have seen this too. More and more native woody encroachment into the prairie over a period of time. Right now, we burn around 50% of the Flint Hills on the average every year. Chase County does a better job than that. We burn around 70. I'm a little bit biased, but Chase County has the cleanest and best tall grass prairie in the Flint Hills. And a lot of it is because of how it's grazed and how it's burned, okay? So, we're going to have to burn more, or we're going to continue to lose acres to woody encroachment. Burning is a necessity, not an option. There are also positive economic benefits for cattle production from burning. 10 to 15% better cattle gain on a burned pasture versus an unburned pasture. Now think about that, okay? A rancher told me one time that his neighbors would say, "How often should we burn our pastures?" And his answer was, "Only in the years you want to make money." Now think about that. For the ranchers to continue to be the caretakers and the stewards of the prairie grasslands, they got to make a living. We're really lucky. Burning is a positive economic thing, and it's a positive ecological thing. We got the best of both worlds when we light a match. Okay? Controlling the woodies, that's a big part. The later you burn, the better. A growing season, you know, we hear all this talk about different burning times. And if it works for you, that's fine. I'm not going to badmouth it, but I have my biases, okay? Spring burn, the later you burn, the better, because the woodies have had a chance to green up and have some growth getting started, and if we can burn them off, we stand a better chance of killing them, okay? If you want to do a growing season burn, during the growing season, you'll kill a lot of woodies if you got the fuel to carry a fire, but you're going to burn up all your grazing, all your grass to graze for a period of time, a consequence. Dormant season burning, y'all have heard about burning in September, November. Anytime you bare that ground and it doesn't have a chance to grow some forage back on it, we're laying it wide open for erosion. Wind erosion, water erosion. I see it all the time because there are some people that do that kind of stuff. If that's your deal, all right, but you got to realize the consequences of doing that, okay? I know a lot of you ranchers have seen wildfires that have went through in August and September, okay? That's, you know, we've got time for the grass to grow back And so we take away that erosion threat, but we really weaken the grass plants. You know, and Jeff and Alan, you guys have watched that over the years, Bobby. When you burn some of the grass off in September, you can see where that area burned for several years afterwards. And that's because we have weakened those grass plants because we've disrupted their cycle of storing root reserves. A lot of work being done on carbon. I just don't know as how I've seen any work that says for sure where burning and the Flint Hills fit into it, but golly, anything you can do to grow more grass has got to be good for helping that carbon cycle. Downside of burning. I got behind my slides. Okay, we're killing some woodies. This is what's happening. Not just the cedars, but dogwood, buckbrush, elm trees. Man, every time I turn on the TV, they got a fire in Reno County or Sedgwick County. God bless Reno and Sedgwick County. But they quit burning a long time ago, and now they grow a lot of brush, and we have some pretty severe fires once it gets in that old dry brush, okay? And a lot of it is because of the cedars. This is what we want to look like. Send the fire through there, smoke some of those cedars. All right, there is some downside to burning. Safety is a big one. When the Indians burn, I'm going to make a big assumption because I wasn't here. When the Indians burn, whatever burn, okay? They didn't have a lot of worries about safety other than themselves and their village. Today, burning is a big job. It's a dangerous job. We got to be concerned about the safety of the people doing the burn. Smoke on the highways, cause wrecks, airports, okay, buildings, hay. Every now and then we burn down a set of pins. Not very good. Trying to keep that smoke off the highway, off the roads. This is what we're after. We get that burn, we get that new growth coming on. I want to take just a minute and talk about air quality, okay? I just told all of you, and I'm sincere about it, my goal is to promote annual burning and cutting trees. Any rancher or landowner that makes a little money, a wise way to spend it, if you're in the grass business in the Flint Hills, is to cut and kill trees so that we can get more fire to go through those areas and reclaim some of that woody encroachment, okay? I'm promoting more burning. I say annual burning because it'll never happen. But if you all set out and say, I'm going to burn every year, you're going to end up burning 8 out of 10 years. And that's a lot better than 5 out of 10, okay? We got smoke problems right now with 5 out of 10 years. If we burn 8 out of 10 years, we're going to have more smoke. We're going to have more disgruntled urban areas, okay? Now, I don't like breathing smoke either, but air quality associated with burning is a very real but very temporary problem. It don't last very long. Air pollution off of vehicles lasts every day, because we keep driving them every day. When we're done burning prairies, the downside of air quality associated with burning disappears. A temporary air quality problem with huge ecological benefits. Now, ladies and gentlemen, and I hope a lot of you live in an urban area, and we'll check some of this stuff out. But we ought to be in a position to give up 10 days worth of air quality to save an ecosystem. That's my thinking. Now, if I'm wrong, hell, I'll move to Kansas City.